As we've been reporting, CBS News is projecting Donald Trump will win the New Hampshire Republican primary. Trump spoke Tuesday night to a room full of supporters celebrating his third straight primary win in the Granite State. He mocked his only remaining opponent, Nikki Haley, saying she, quote, had a very bad night. CBS News is projecting Nikki Haley will still get at least 9 delegates from New Hampshire. Let's bring back in Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett. Major, there has been, you've heard it 18 billion times, a theory among a lot of liberals that there would be an emperor has no clothes moment with Donald Trump, that somebody would just point out a weakness he has and then it would all fall into a new truth. I can imagine that fantasy is now being kicked around with respect to Nikki Haley. Is there any room in the party that you understand, or I should say, give us a sense of how difficult the hill is for Nikki Haley to get the nomination, even though she says she's going to carry on?
Okay, the nomination is always about delegate acquisition, John, and you acquire delegates by winning primaries and caucuses. And in every race on the map currently, Donald Trump is the projected and prohibitive frontrunner. Nikki Haley is running an insurgent campaign to try to take the nomination away from Donald Trump when many in the Republican Party have already made up the mind he's going to win that nomination. So how does she do that? You have to hold what you have as an advantage, and you have to build from there. You have to scale, if you will, to talk about it in tech terms. So what does Nikki Haley have on her side? She has temperament, and she has an argument about electability. What's interesting in the exit polling data, for Trump supporters, 34% said he has values like mine. 27% of Nikki Haley supporters said she has values like theirs. What does that mean? Among Republicans who are generally speaking conservative, she does okay in that values metric. She has to build on that, hold the temperament, and then express to South Carolinians and future primary and caucus states that she's also a fighter who can achieve results for them. That is the big space that Nikki Haley currently cannot and does not occupy. Trump has that fight for you, produce for you entity within the Republican Party. Nikki Haley has to try to take that away from Trump, and that's going to be really the contours of the South Carolina Republican debate. Trump will say, as president, I fought for you and I produced for you. Nikki Haley can say, I fought for you as governor, but not as recently as Trump. She's going to have to find a way to say, not only do I fight for you, and you can believe that I fight for you, but I can produce results that she likes to say you can not only be proud of, but that make your life better.
You have covered Donald Trump and seen the identity connection that a lot of his voters have, and a lot of those voters participate in these contests. That connection is more durable than just one's position on taxes or immigration. You know, give us a little bit more of your wisdom on how hard that argument is for Haley to make because of this personal connection so many of Trump's voters have to him.
Right. We've talked about the possibilities for Nikki Haley. What are the realities around Donald Trump and his relationship to the Republican Party? One, he has remade it in his image. He has taken that fighter approach, that America First language, and basically made it the default position of the Republican Party. That is a not insignificant political achievement and a durable one. Add to that, John, the sense that Trump supporters have that he is being unfairly prosecuted in the various cases that he has to deal with, be they civil or criminal. And that is a very powerful dynamic. It proved itself in Iowa. It's proved itself resilient here. Nikki Haley began to refer to that tonight for the first time in sort of more starkly contrasting ways. He has problems. They're legal problems. They're not going away. One of the things that former President Trump wanted to achieve here in New Hampshire was, if not a knockout punch, the sense that his path to the GOP nomination is inevitable, and essentially say political success immunizes me from any of my legal problems. Nikki Haley is going to have to say, actually, it doesn't, former President Trump. Political success is just that. It doesn't immunize you from your legal problems. They're going to continue, and they're going to be a part of the Republican conversation. And she's going to have to draw that point of contrast in ways to pull that sense of rallying around former President Trump to say, wait a minute, maybe we ought to pause and think about that. And Nikki Haley might be an alternative that is not only safer because she has no legal issues, but might be more electable in a general election. It's a complicated argument. She doesn't have much time to make it, but that is the terrain that is open to her.
Boy, that's so smart, that point about immunization. We saw Senator Cornyn of Texas say that he was endorsing Donald Trump, and he said the voters have spoken. Many of his endorsers who want to elide or get around some of the very obvious difficulties that former President Trump has will respond to a question you might ask about, for example, his responsibility for trying to overthrow an election, and they will say, well, the voters have spoken. Using just that immunization you talked about. As a final question, Major, what kind of race do we have now? I'm going to make you do what I made Ed O'Keefe do. So what's your lead of the magazine story you would have written when we first knew each other?
That's right. It would be this. Donald Trump hasn't had a one-on-one, person-on-person race for the Republican nomination in his political history. Does he know how to wage that fight? That is the overall meta question out of New Hampshire. It's one-on-one. Can he win when it's just one other candidate and not dividing in many different ways the anti-Trump vote? Can he take what he has and pick up on my very first point about Nikki Haley's challenge, hold and build? That's the challenge for President Trump. He's well positioned to do that. Better positioned than Nikki Haley is, but it's a real race.
We'll put it in the magazine. No notes, Major. Thanks very much, Major Garrett.
You got it.
Let's go back to our CBS News data desk. Our Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, is here. Hello again, Anthony.
Hello, John. Go ahead.
Tell me, well, do you have something on your mind, or?
I was just going to put in context something you and Major were just talking about, because look, what's a primary night without showing some delegate math, right? This is delegates to date, and this big space here represents how far we have to go to the 1,215 that are needed for the nomination. Now, we know that primaries are about momentum and about attention, especially the early ones, but just so everybody is reminded, we're a long way and we haven't really handed out a lot of delegates yet, John.
How different is, I asked you this at the beginning of the night, I might as well ask you at the end, the New Hampshire electorate, now that we know the shape of it and what it looks like, and the Iowa electorate, and does that help us understand the Republican Party of today and the one in the future contests that we'll be watching?
It does. Here's one example of the difference. We talked about how Donald Trump won Republicans and Nikki Haley did better with independents. Here's how that breaks out, right? In Iowa, it was dominated by people who called themselves Republicans. In New Hampshire, it was almost even between people who called themselves Republicans and those who called independents. This is important for two reasons. One is it underscores the identity of all this, the fact that when someone identifies as a Republican these days, by and large, they look for loyalty or at least lack of criticism of Donald Trump, and that personal connection remains. But the independents, as illustrated here in New Hampshire, sets up a different test, and that is that if you imagine the electorate in the general election as something of at least a need to get into what we call the middle, then you have to talk about independence and you have to talk about appeal to independence. And that's where Nikki Haley will at least make her argument, bolstered by New Hampshire and the fact that she does better than Joe Biden in the national polling. Last point, Republicans don't buy that. They still think Donald Trump is the guy to beat Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's such an excellent point. And partially they don't buy it because of that identity reason, because for many of them, he's a winner, always a winner, never a loser, ever, even when he did lose. Anthony, final question. Is there any way to any wisdom in looking at how dominant Trump was in 2016 and how successful he's been this evening to tell us anything about whether Republicans in that part of the party have soured on him or changed their minds, or anything we can learn from comparing those two votes?
Yeah, it's different in the sense that it shows you how the party has coalesced around him in these 8 years. In 2016, and sometimes I look at this map and I can't believe it's been 8 years, we projected this race. Look, Donald Trump, obviously he didn't get a majority of the vote that year, a more fractured field, but he did comparably better with, other kinds of groups other than just Republicans in that one. He won a lot of area, won a lot of geographic territory, just as he did tonight, but he really had more support among, at the time, more independents, a little more moderates. This is very different. Now that base, and now we measure that base as people who identify themselves as part of the MAGA movement. So you fast forward then to today, and he's got a higher percentage, But the story in that is that it comes from a different place. It comes from more loyal Republicans, conservatives, MAGA voters. That's the core of the party right now.
Anthony Salvanto, a pleasure as always. Thank you so much, Anthony.